Madam Speaker, I come to this side of the aisle as a proud Republican, but most importantly, as a proud American. Today we saw an assault on our democracy.
That was GOP Representative Tom Reed speaking before he then actually physically crossed the aisle to object to the Arizona electoral votes challenge after quite the trying day on Capitol Hill. He moved from that podium. He then went and stood next to his fellow Problem Solvers Caucus chair, Democratic Representative Josh Gottheimer. Joining us now, Republican Congressman Tom Reed of New York. Welcome, Congressman. I'm first going to ask if you and your staff are okay and safe and hopefully no one was hurt.
No, I really appreciate the concern, and the staff and all of us are safe, secure, but what a disheartening day yesterday, just to everyone. It was just a terrible day for America yesterday.
How was your move to walk across the aisle in a show of support, as you said, as a proud Republican? How has that been taken by GOP members?
You know, the support has been amazing. I had many GOP members. I had a lot of Democratic members who came up and said, you know what, that was the message to send last evening. And I did it because I believe that we can be proud Republicans and we can meet with Democrats and we can have the debate in America. And what we have to do is demonstrate to the American people we do not take to the streets. We do not take in mob rule the law into our own hands. What we do is we debate it the old-fashioned way in America, and we settle our differences at the election in the ballot box, not with mob rule.
You said in your speech last night that you would fight to uphold Republican ideals. What are those right now?
Right now, I'm a proud Republican. I became a Republican watching Ronald Reagan come into office. And I got to tell you, what he's inspired in the hearts and minds of the American people was that Republicans are about freedom. Republicans are about empowering people, the party of opportunity. And in contrast with the Democratic Party, which is about government and being government the source of guaranteeing people's success in life. I still believe in innovation. I still believe in the entrepreneurs. And what the Republican Party about is national security and making sure that people have an opportunity to have a fair shake to fail or succeed on their own merits. That's the Republican Party I believe in, and that's the Republican Party that will see this nation to a better heights in the future.
Well, we are also seeing on the screen what people who were told by the effective leader of the GOP, President Trump, were told to do, which was go to the Capitol right now. Go to the Capitol. And they did. And we see what had happened. So my question is President Trump still the leader of the GOP? How do you view him?
Well, you know, truth be told, I was one of the first 8 to endorse President Trump. And what President Trump did with policies in the administration, I support those policies. But what the rhetoric and what I saw in the National Mall yesterday, clearly I disagree with the rhetoric that was displayed by President Trump. And what happened is something, as a president, I would hope the president would reconsider any type of action along those lines. And I appreciated his statement today, where he said we are going to have an orderly transfer of power come January 20th. And President-elect Biden will become President Biden on January 20th. That's the leadership I expect out of President Trump going forward. And his ideas in regards to what he brought to the White House over the last 4 years, I am going to carry forward those ideas in regards to those ideas are part of my Republican ideology.
But yet, I'm confused by that because some of his ideas were in direct opposition to what Ronald Reagan had pushed forth. Ronald Reagan wanted less spending. And what did you have? You had a huge jump in the debt and, of course, the deficit. Massive spending like drunken sailors, and it was way worse than anything that George Bush or President Obama had done.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's where, in the Republican Party, we are a party that is open to those divisions and those differences of opinion. And so there's a distinction that I would have with President Trump. I mean, we have to get our national debt under control. We have to get our fiscal house in order. But at the same time, when President Trump took on the issue of fair trade, open and not being afraid of trade, but making sure that it's fair, in regards to China and other issues, to making investments in national security so that we have a military that is strong. Those types of priorities are something that we can, as a policy embrace, but we cannot embrace the rhetoric that we saw yesterday from President Trump, and I reject that, and I am not going to be part of that. I am going to stand for a vision of the Republican Party that is not going to incite violence, that is going to stand for inspiring the hearts and minds of people across America.
We thank you. We thank you very much for